The sun had barely risen over the distant hills when David opened his eyes. The smell of wet earth filled the small hut where he lived. A roof made of straw, walls cracked with time, and silence that spoke louder than words. He was 16, but his eyes carried the weight of a man twice his age. In that little forgotten village, life was not about dreams. It was about survival. Every morning, David would walk barefoot across the rough soil to fetch water from the well 2 miles away. His hands, rough and bruised, were a map of the struggle he never chose. His father had died when David was only 12, a farmer who believed that even dry land could bloom with faith. His mother, a woman of unshakable patience, worked at nearby fields to feed him and his younger sister, Lily. They were poor, yes, but they were rich in love, until life took even that away. One stormy night, lightning struck their small hut. Fire swallowed their home. David woke up coughing, surrounded by smoke and heat. He tried to grab his sister's hand, but the flames were faster than his screams. By dawn, everything he loved, his mother, his sister, their memories, had turned into ashes. The villagers helped him bury what was left, whispering prayers, pity, and silence. And when it was all over, David sat alone beside the graves, staring at the sky that looked back without emotion. He had lost everything: his family, his home, his reason to smile. For days, he wandered through the village like a ghost. Some offered him food, others just a sympathetic look. But no one could fill the emptiness inside him. He stopped talking. He stopped believing. Then one evening, sitting near the same well where he used to fetch water, David whispered to himself, "If there's nothing left to lose, maybe there's still something left to find." Those words were the first spark of hope. Small, fragile, but alive. He decided to leave the village. No money, no family, no destination. Just a burning desire to run away from the ashes of his past. He walked for days, through forests, roads, rain, and hunger. Sometimes he begged for food, sometimes he slept under trees. His body was weak, but his will refused to break. After weeks of wandering, he reached a small town, crowded, noisy, and full of strangers. It was there that his new life began. Not by miracle, but by misery. He found work carrying bricks at a construction site. Every day, under the scorching sun, he lifted the weight of others' dreams while trying to rebuild his own. He was paid little, sometimes not at all, but for the first time in months, he was alive. At night, when everyone slept, David would sit by the roadside and watch the lights of the city. He'd whisper, "One day I'll have a light that doesn't fade." People laughed at him, called him foolish, too ambitious for a boy who had nothing. But David had learned one truth from his pain. When you've already lost everything, fear has nothing left to take. Weeks turned into months. David's back hurt, his hands bled, but his heart started to grow stronger. He began saving small coins in an old tin box, not for food, not for luxury, but for books. He would buy secondhand books from a street vendor, torn, dirty, but full of wisdom. Books about men who failed and rose again, about people who built their destiny out of dust. Every night, he read by the dim light of a broken lamp. Words became his mentors, and dreams became his companions. He wasn't sure what he wanted to become. He only knew he didn't want to remain what he was. One day, while carrying bricks, an old man noticed him. The man was an engineer. Kind eyes, white beard, and a voice that carried calm authority. He asked, "Boy, why do you work so hard when everyone else gives up after a few hours?" David looked up, wiping sweat from his face, and said, "Because this isn't my end." The old man smiled. then maybe it's your beginning. That one line, maybe it's your beginning, lit something inside David. From that day, he worked not just to earn, but to learn. The old man began teaching him small things: how to measure, how to plan, how to read blueprints. David absorbed everything like dry land drinks rain. Slowly, he became more than just a worker. He became a learner. Months later, when the project ended, the old man told him, "You have something rare. Hunger. Not for food, but for growth. Don't lose it." David didn't. He moved from job to job. Sometimes lifting bricks, sometimes serving tea, sometimes cleaning offices. But everywhere he went, he learned something new. He studied people, discipline, and the hidden strength that only pain can teach. Years passed. His body grew stronger, his mind sharper. And though the world still called him the poor boy from the village, he smiled because he knew who he was becoming. The morning sun rose over the dusty road as David took his first steps away from his village. He had nothing but a small bag, an old pair of shoes, and a dream that refused to die. Every step hurt. Every memory of failure tried to pull him back. But there was a quiet fire inside him that whispered, "Keep going." When he finally reached the city, it felt like another world. The air smelled different. The streets were louder, and everyone seemed to be running toward something he couldn't see. For the first time, he felt small again, invisible in a world that didn't care who he was. But deep down, he remembered his mother's last words. "Son, it's not the world that decides your worth. It's what you do when the world doubts you." Those words kept him moving. Days turned into weeks as he searched for work. He knocked on doors, handed out resumes, and faced rejection after rejection. Sometimes he went hungry, sometimes he slept on park benches. The city that once looked full of promise now felt cold and cruel. One night, as he sat under the pale streetlight, staring at the empty sky, he whispered, "Maybe I was foolish to dream." His eyes were tired, his hands rough, his heart heavier than his bag. But just then he noticed an old man feeding stray dogs nearby. The man had little, yet his face glowed with peace. David watched in silence, realizing that hope doesn't need luxury. It only needs a reason. The next morning, David helped the old man without asking for anything in return. They swept streets, carried boxes, and worked small jobs together. Every day David learned something new, not about the world, but about himself. He learned humility, patience, and how kindness can heal tired souls. Months passed, and one evening, while cleaning an office building, he overheard two executives talking about a business competition. They wanted young minds with fresh ideas to help improve communities. That night, lying on the storeroom floor, David couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept spinning until an idea sparked in his mind. A solar-powered water filter for villages like his own. He grabbed his old notebook and began sketching. The design wasn't perfect, but it was something that could bring clean water to people who had been forgotten by the world. He had no education in technology, no resources, but he had determination. He went to libraries during the day, watched tutorials late at night, and asked strangers for advice. Some ignored him, some laughed, but a few saw the fire in his eyes and helped. After weeks of trial and error, he finally built his first prototype using recycled bottles and broken solar panels. For a moment it worked beautifully, until it exploded in smoke. David stood there frozen, heart pounding, as his small room filled with the smell of burnt plastic. For a moment he felt the old voice of doubt creeping in again. But then he smiled through the tears and said quietly, "Every failure teaches me how not to fail again." He started again the next day, and the next. He failed a dozen more times, but each version was better than the last. One night, After endless attempts, clean water finally trickled out of his filter. It wasn't much, but it was real. He laughed and cried at the same time. That night, he didn't just fix a machine. He rebuilt himself. When the day of the business competition arrived, David stood before a crowd wearing borrowed clothes. His hands trembled, but his voice didn't. He told them about his invention, his struggles, and his dream to make clean water available to every poor family. When he finished, the room fell silent, and then applause erupted. For the first time in years, David felt seen. He didn't just win the competition. He won respect, belief, and purpose. Investors approached him, and soon he founded a small company focused on solar-powered solutions for rural communities. Years later, David returned to his village. The same dusty roads that once felt hopeless were now lined with solar filters providing clean water. Children laughed where once they cried. Old women smiled as they filled their pots without fear of sickness. David walked quietly, tears in his eyes, until an old lady placed her trembling hand on his shoulder and said, "You brought light to our darkness, David." He smiled softly and replied, "No, I just gave hope a chance to shine." His journey had come full circle, from a boy who had lost everything to a man who gave others the power to dream again. His story became a reminder that sometimes losing everything isn't the end. It's the beginning of something greater. Because when the world says you can't, hope whispers, "Try one more time." And that whisper is what keeps the fire within alive forever. Months turned into years, and David's small idea grew beyond what he had ever imagined. His company started sending solar filters to hundreds of villages. People who had never seen clean water before were now drinking it every day. Children who used to fall sick were now laughing, studying, and dreaming. The media started talking about him, the boy who changed his country. But David never let the fame change his heart. He still woke up early, still worked late, and still remembered those nights when he had slept on park benches with nothing but faith. One afternoon, he received an invitation to speak at an international conference. World leaders, scientists, and entrepreneurs would be there. The boy from the village who once had nothing was now going to stand among the world's greatest minds. When he walked onto that stage, lights flashing, cameras rolling, he paused for a second. The crowd was waiting for him to speak, but his mind wandered back to his village, to his mother's face, to the dusty roads, to the hunger and pain that once defined him. And then he smiled. He began softly, "When I was a child, I believed the world was too big for someone like me. I thought dreams were meant for others. People born rich, people born lucky. But one day, I realized that luck isn't what finds you. It's what you create when you refuse to stop trying." The audience listened in silence. I built my first water filter from garbage. It failed again and again, but every failure whispered the same thing: try again. And now, when I see clean water flowing in villages, I don't see success. I see hope made real. The crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed. People cheered. But David didn't stay long after the event. He quietly left the hall, took a taxi to the outskirts of the city, and spent the evening watching the sunset alone. He still felt like the same boy who had once walked those long miles with torn shoes and a dream in his heart. He whispered to himself, "Everything I lost brought me here." Over the next few years, David expanded his work to other countries. His invention reached drought-affected lands, refugee camps, and schools in remote mountains. Every time he saw people drinking clean water, he felt a deep sense of peace, as if every struggle, every heartbreak had been worth it. But success never erased his humility. He continued to live simply, always reminding his team, "We are not building machines. We are building hope. One day, he visited a school in a poor village in Africa. The children gathered around him, curious, smiling, their faces full of light. One small boy tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Sir, how did you become so great?" David bent down, looked into his eyes, and said, "I'm not great. I just never gave up." The boy nodded slowly, his smile widening as if those words had planted a seed inside his heart. Years later, David's name became a symbol of resilience and hope. People from all over the world shared his story. But what most didn't know was that every night he still wrote in his old notebook, the same one he had used to draw his first design. On one of the last pages, he wrote, "The real success is not how high you rise, but how many people you lift with you." Time passed. David grew older, but his purpose only grew stronger. When people asked him what kept him going, he would say, "I remember where I came from. I remember the days when no one believed in me. I work for those who still live those days." One evening, he returned to his home village again. The streets were brighter now, the children healthier, the people happier. As he walked through, a little girl ran up to him, handed him a flower, and said, "My mother says you're the reason we have clean water." David smiled, kneeling down to her level. "No," he said softly, "your mother is the reason. She believed in change. I just helped it happen." As the sun dipped below the horizon, David stood there silently, watching the golden light fade into the sky. He had lost everything once, his home, his family, his hope. But life had given it all back in a different form, not as wealth or fame, but as peace. He realized that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's only to make room for something better. And in that quiet moment, with the wind brushing past and the sound of laughter echoing from the village, David closed his eyes and whispered, "The world didn't change me. Hope did." His journey was more than a story. It was a message that no matter where you come from, no matter how broken you feel, there is always a way to rise again. You just have to believe that your scars are not signs of defeat. They are proof that you survived. Because sometimes, losing everything is how you learn to find yourself. And when you find yourself, the whole world changes with you.